Okay, we're calling to order the meeting of the MWPA Citizens Oversight Committee on October the 26th, 2022 at 5:32. And Martina, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Member Chu,
Here.
Member Cole,
Here.
Member Dilworth,
Yeah.
Member Howard,
Here.
Member McCauley,
Present.
Member Minikis,
I am here.
Member Randolph,
Here.
Chair Suggs.
Here.
And then I just wanted to note that although his name is on the agenda, Member Wara has stepped down from the Citizens Oversight Committee.
Thank you. Any adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none. We'll now do open time for public expression. And
The public is welcome to address the Citizens Oversight Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code, Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. We ask that you please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak during the public expression period, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself if you're joining us by phone, or raise your hand in the reactions. And ma'am, we do not currently have any attendees and therefore no public comments.
thank you, Martina. Next item on the agenda is the Executive Officer's Report.
Good
Mark?
evening. Good
Mark
evening, everybody.
Morris?
Great to see you all. Fire weather, I think we all know, has been mild, especially this fall. We had a very, very light offshore wind event a couple days ago, which is about 3 weeks later than we normally get them. Obviously, something that we are really enjoying and appreciate. One of my more paranoid friends, though, has made a comparison, and firefighters tend to do this a lot. We have that mental Rolodex in our head, right? And we start comparing situations, comparing trends. And he pointed out this feels very much like 2018. We didn't have a tremendously busy fire season in 2018. The end of October had some precipitation. People started to get their mind out of wildland fire season, and here came the campfire in Paradise, and the fuel conditions are very similar to that. The weather trend is very similar to that. Unless we get some appreciable precipitation throughout the entire state, we are still one wind event away from having devastating fire. And I don't like being a fear monger, but it is the state of the situation that we're here. So it really is important to remind people to not drop their guards. And that's what my friend was doing, was trying to remind all the firefighters to not drop their guards. Super excited to mention that we will be bringing the MWPA's annual report to the board in November. We are just finalizing a couple of the tables that are on it, and we'll be bringing it to the board to release. So a lot of, as you go through the year, you're busy, but when you look back on it through that annual report, you actually see how much work actually got done. I almost got tired reading it. John is going to bring this up, so I won't dig into it too much, but we did our end of year closeout for fiscal year 21-22 and worked with the member agencies and the 5 zones where they would like to roll over the unspent funds. One of our finance committee members asked a question that some of you might be asking, and that has to do with GAN limits, and if we are bound by the GAN limits. The GAN limits 2 years of underspending. You have to come up with a plan to spend that unspent money in a certain way. When MWPA was first formed, we had our legal teams do an analysis, and the MWPA's joint powers agreement is not bound by the GAN limits. So we won't have to change how we're spending. I did mention in the meeting at the finance committee and at the board meeting that our spending did exceed my own internal expectations. However, we did underspend by 4.5 million. However, I think our mechanisms are in place to not repeat an underspend. And I'll be personally challenging each of our member agencies in each of our 5 zones to make sure that we do all the work that we're supposed to do with a balance of making sure the spending that we're doing is quality spending and not spending for the sake of spending. Another thing John will mention is our grants program has actually really expanded, and we are getting hundreds of applications and funding hundreds of projects. The Ross Valley actually exhausted all of their funding. San Rafael was halfway through exhausting. West Marin was about halfway through exhausting their funds. And when we first set up the grant program, we created silos for each of the 5 zones, and some zones were overspending or at least spending quickly, and some zones were underspending. So the board approved pooling all of that grant money into one pool. However, we think that's only going to give us 3 more months of funding for grant programs. So we'll go to the operations committee and ask them to evaluate projects that are being underspent right now, and if we want to funnel that unspent money into the grant program so we can continue to support our residents. Another thing that here's a little preview into our executive committee meeting. I'm bringing forward a timeline for the MWPA to transition into in-person meetings. As you probably heard, the governor has stated that the state of emergency for COVID will end at the end of February. So that means Assembly Bill 361, which has been allowing our remote meetings in conjunction with the Brown Act, will go away. Assembly Bill 2449, which has some easier ways for board members and committee members to attend a Brown Act meeting, will go into effect March of 2023. It's not really making it super easy for Brown Act committees to meet remotely. A quorum must be in person. You must have a reason to, there's allowable reasons, and you can only use those allowable reasons 2 times a year. There are emergency reasons, and you can only use those emergency reasons up to 3 consecutive meetings, or I think it's a quarter of the agency's meetings, so on and so forth. The only thing that made it easier is that you wouldn't have to have your remote location be accessible to the public and post an agenda. So let's say you're at a work conference and you're at a hotel, you would literally have to post the agenda at the hotel. You no longer have to do that. That's about the only thing Assembly Bill 2449 made easier. And I know that John and Larry know exactly what I'm talking about. And so we'll also have to identify who is attending remotely. We'll have to provide the means for people to attend remotely, but we still are going to be it's the public participation that's been amended with the 2449, and accessibility for the public to continue to attend remotely. So we are building out our board chambers now. We actually met with the contractor today and did some final put this here, put this there, and they're going to start their work tomorrow. We are looking to have a hybrid meeting for the board in December, and we're laying out 3 options on how the board can go, how we as the MWPA can go from that hybrid meeting in December to in-person meetings in March. Pertinent to you guys, we have received 12 out of the 17 member agencies local and DSpace spending reports and snapshots in time for fiscal year 1920. Out of the 5 agencies that have, or 5 members agencies that haven't sent me the stuff, they have all been contacted and admonished is probably the wrong word, but asked to get their information to me ASAP so we can get it to you guys. The good news is it's actually only 3 agencies I need to get the information from. It's because of the way agencies are being managed by one particular location. Lucy, thank you for the call the other day. And I just wanted to mention that here in the executive officer report. And that is how you guys will know and when you will know how we are adjusting our policies and practices based on your annual report that you submitted to us. And I think I've mentioned before, we had a very successful task force meeting to identify the areas of that were not policy driven, and we have some excellent and creative ideas how to move forward, especially for the recommendation about spending in West Marin. And we also had some overlap in where that task force needed to look at policies, as well as the finance committee that needed to look at policies. So we have started the policy writing process. We've identified which policies need to be amended, where they're going to go in each of the policies. And now we're going to go, staff and I will be making assignments of who's going to be writing what. And so that we can bring it to the finance committee in December. And when it comes to the non-policy related items, many of those items will need to go to the operations committee first, just to get their feedback on it. And then we'll be able to, and the operations committee will meet in December. So that'll be one of the first agenda items. So in December is when you're going to see the policy items that we are adjusting and the procedural items that we'll be adjusting. And we'll make sure that we relate them to each of the recommendations from that. And then second to last item, we are preparing our website for the COC recruitment for Novato, environmental, and taxpayer for 3-year terms each. And then we also have a civic group seat that will be open for 2 years. So that recruitment will start November 1st and end November 30th. The chair or the president of the board will select an ad hoc subcommittee to review those applications and then make a recommendation to the full board in December for that. And my last thing is that our site visits are continuing. The site visit we had in San Rafael was very well attended and I think appreciated. Our next site visit will be in Novato, and I think we're on pace to average about 1 site visit a month, and just because they've been so informative for the people that are attending. And if you want to learn more, find out more about our next site visit, if you go to the community calendar on our homepage, you'll see the Novato site visit listed on there. With that, I'll take any questions.
I think Lucy has her hand up.
Just a clarification, Mark, you mentioned that the reports were in from the agencies, but I thought you said 1920, which I'm thinking it's 21-22.
So the spending reports for 21-22, and then the snapshot of budget for 19-20. Remember, that was one of the recommendations, was to get the snapshot of the member agencies' budgets for 19 and 20.
Okay, that's terrific. That gives us a benchmark.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Oh, and one other question. You mentioned the site visits. Is the intention for the site visits to encourage the public to understand and see what's going on, or is it sort of more an internal matter?
Public.
Okay.
Really would like to start seeing more and more public. So through your own personal networks, if you can encourage attendance, absolutely. We'd love to see more public out there.
Thanks.
Anything else for Mark?
It's like Member Howard has her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to find these site visits on the site. Mark, do you mind telling me where I can find them?
I'm gonna pull up the website here real quick and I'll do a screen share. How's that?
Great, thank you.
I think I've been to all of those and they are very, very informative. And, you know, I encourage people to bring friends because we continue to preach to the choir.
So here's our website, and one reminder about our website, the same header is always on every one of our pages. And if you want to just get back to the home page, just click on the title or name and it'll bring you back to the home page. If you scroll down, you get the community calendar, and it takes a little bit of a time to populate, but if you click on that, it'll bring it up for you.
Great, thanks a lot.
FYI, Martina, or whoever else is looking, I cannot see raised hands on my iPad screen.
We'll let you know.
Thanks. Okay, Martina, we go to the public for comments on Mark's.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the executive officer's report, please raise your hand on the reactions or press *9. If you are joining us by phone, to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And Madam Chair, we do not have any public comments.
Next item on the agenda is consent calendar. And Martina, we go to the public before we do approvals on this one.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the consent calendar item only, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself if you're joining us by phone. And ma'am, we do not have any public comments.
Thank you. And did I just skip right over the part I was going to read? Short-term memory loss.
You're good. You're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bringing it back then for the full committee to do approval on minutes of the September 28th Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. Could I get any discussion on that? Or get just in a motion to approve?
I make the motion to approve the minutes.
Second,
Thank you. Martina, can you do a roll call?
Absolutely. Motion by Member Cole, and I had a second by both Member Chu and Member Randolph. Member Chu, your vote, sir.
Aye.
Member Cole,
Aye.
Member Dilworth,
Aye.
Member Howard,
Hi.
Member Macaulay,
Along with Larry's cat, I also say aye.
Is-
Member Minikis,
It's out of range.
I can come back to him. Member Randolph,
aye.
Chair Suggs,
Aye.
and Member Minikis, if you are there, sir.
I'm back. Yes, aye.
Perfect. So we have a unanimous approval of the consent calendar.
Thanks, Martina. Okay. Moving on to item 7 on the agenda, committee reports. Start off with the monitoring reports. So those of you who had assignments for meetings occurring since our last meeting, you could give a brief list of outputs for us, but this would be items that are of relevance to the Citizens Oversight Committee. We'll start with Pat for Executive Committee.
So the executive committee did meet and a good deal of it was in executive session. But I saw no items that were necessary to bring to the COC from the executive committee meeting.
Thank you. For Board of Directors, Lucy.
Board of Directors meeting went on a very long time, spent a lot of time on some very interesting findings from the Godby survey that looked at attitudes and measuring attitudes and understandings or some such expression of public understanding of the work of the agencies, of wildfire risk. They were quantitatively very interesting. There was one concern expressed by the board that more people seem to understand CAL FIRE and their local agencies than they seem to see the role as yet of the MWPA. but that's because I think the agency is beginning its work and people are more familiar with their local agencies. But that's obviously something that the agency is going to be looking at to get the recognition that it deserves for the output that it's been paying for and the work it's doing. So that was one element that was, I think, just worth noting. The other was the issue that Mark mentioned, which is the pooling of resources for grants. And I think that that's an interesting development because it sort of fits in with the agency's overall approach, which is county-wide, and that it shouldn't just be meted out to specific zones. And in general, I think it's an interesting development. I don't know whether anybody has any other thoughts on the matter.
Thanks, Lucy.
Okay.
I did have a couple of thoughts about the pooling item that it might be something that the COC wants to watch or discuss as it starts to happen, to see if staff thinks that it's flowing the way one would have expected, and is everybody happy with it, or anything anybody's gonna keep an eye on and see how it's going, or is it just a done deal and it's gonna keep happening? I just think it's one of those where it could be in the realm of how the money's being spent. And it's being spent a little bit differently than the original vision, but maybe not. I mean, as you pointed out, Lucy, maybe it's even more in the vision than it was. So I'm not sure. I just that it struck me that it was spending money, and maybe we ought to be interested.
And Rebecca, you do have two hands, one from Kingston and one from John McCauley.
Thank you. Kingston.
Yeah, there was a presentation that was made by ESP and Bruce Goins about a biomass project that they're moving forward with. And Bruce just sort of mentioned as a comment that he thought there's going to be an action task force that a member of the COC should probably be on it. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we might get an invitation. I'm not sure. Mark, maybe you can. Was that just an off the cuff remark, or?
I think it was off the cuff, and I don't think it quite fits the.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I mean, yeah.
I think it was off the cuff, Kingston. I agree.
Okay.
Off the cuff, but interesting that it's on his brain.
He loves you guys.
Yeah. Can't get rid of us fast enough. Okay.
And I'm sorry, who was the other hand up? Martina?
John.
John, thank you.
I'm just going to comment briefly that I was the person who brought the concept of the allocation of cost by district to the Board of Supervisors back when the initiative was being put together. And we purposefully did it with a design that it wasn't exact. In other words, it was 80%, not 100%. And it wasn't by city, it was by zone. And it was measured at the 5-year period and then subject to adjustment during the remaining 5 years, with the idea that there would be an overall allocation by district, which was reasonably consistent with the amount of money which was put in by each of the group or each of the zones, but not precise. And that was the nexus which created the idea in the first place. So just for whatever that's worth, I'm not troubled by combining some smaller elements, as long as in the big picture everything looks right. You know, my whole point when I brought this thing forward was not to be a homer for my town, but to make sure that the overall allocation was reasonable across the whole county. So for background.
And John, if I could just follow up with John, it was our understanding of that language. It was looking at the program as a whole, not individual project by project by project. So
Right.
That's why we feel that it's still in alignment with the language, and with our grant application and disbursement system that we have built. It's literally penny by penny, minute by minute. We can see what's being spent in each zone. And Rebecca, Jennifer Howard has her hand up.
Jennifer.
Do you think that evaluation of the 80% would ever come about in the course of, I mean, wouldn't that have to go back to a vote, or could that be an evaluation within MWPA?
You'd want to make sure that you meet the 80% threshold. I mean, if for instance, Novato only got 50% of the money which is being provided by Novato, that would be troubling and would be something that would become a point of focus. But as long as you meet an 80% threshold, you're okay. It can be 80, be 90, be 110, as long as no one screwed up. That was the whole concept of what was being done there.
I'm not sure my question was understood, or maybe I'm not getting the response, but what if we wanted it to be different? What if we wanted it to be 70% going back to individual and 30% being spread across?
My understanding is that it would take a vote of 75% of the member agencies to make an amendment to the JPA language.
But not a vote by the taxpayers.
No, that 80% stipulation wasn't in the ordinance, so it
Okay.
was in the JPA language.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
And Lucy.
Thank you. This does bring up a topic that we have looked at before, and I'm very interested, John, that you were one of the participants in the original thinking on this 80%, the 60%, or the overall allocation of the 80% of the 60%, because the language on the formation agreement is in fact clearly weighted towards a very long-term view on this rather than an annual accounting, and that it gives a 5-year reconciliation period and then says, if not in 5 years, then in the following 5. So it does give a tremendous leeway for unequal spending, particularly probably in the first years, that could then be evened out over a 5 to even 10-year period. And so that it's with that in mind that I raised concerns some months ago that the zones shouldn't be dictating too strongly to the JPA itself what allocations should go, because they're due more of a certain amount by a constant total rather than waiting for a 5-year total. So, and the COC agreed at that time that this would be something that we would keep an eye on over time. I was concerned about it, but perhaps when your perspective is that it's in fact easier to do it on a sort of more annual reconciliation than waiting a 5-year or 10-year period. Is that, do I read you correctly on that? John.
I want to know who the you was. No, I don't think you look at it on an annual basis. The whole point is that there may be a period of time when one particular project is highly expensive and will exist in one of the areas, and it's worth doing, and you do it, and then you say, okay, you've had your fair share, and now let's go look to another area and spend some money, more money there. So that as long as you cumulatively at the end of the 5 years have a sense you're relatively in the ballpark, and then if you're not, adjust the boat a little bit to get it back in line so that by the end everyone feels that it's fair. The reason I brought it forward in the first place is I was disturbed that my town, for instance, was highly active in historically spending significant amounts of funds to do fire protection. And I didn't want to be in a circumstance where some other cities were, and I didn't know the details, but would be much less active. And then we would end up, essentially financing other cities. Anytime you take funds and spread them over large groups, there's always a concern there. Katie Rice at the time laughed and she said, John, you guys probably have more needs than others, so you're probably hurting yourself. And my response was, great, that's fine. I'm doing this as like a accountant sitting on top looking at things, not individually. But that was the nexus of it. What matters is the words, and the words do allow a measurement at the 5-year and at the 10-year. So I wouldn't be fussed in any given year about individual levels of spend. And at the same time, again, it's 80%, doesn't have to be perfect. It was just a relative sense at the end of the term that the taxpayers collectively would say, okay, we did good and we were reasonably fair among the family. That's how it came about anyway.
And I'll add on real quick again to what John said, just to strengthen what he said. Yes, it's a 5-year average, but we will be tracking annually, just so we don't have a surprise at 5 years, right? And then the prioritization process is what's important. That language was crafted with 80% over a 5-year average. So we could, exactly what John said, say there's a super important project to be done in this zone. And we need to have a process to create that prioritization so that we know that it's done properly. And then the other zones can know, you know what, my turn's coming. When we have a high priority project, we'll get the funding. So that was some of the conversation we had at the task force. And I thought we came up with some really novel ideas how to get it done. And quite frankly, with 80% being that threshold, keeping people at 80% every year, I still think we can overfund 2 of the zones each year.
Okay.
Legitimately. So I'm looking forward to how we create that process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any more hands up or discussion about that?
I think we got it.
Okay, cool. My intention was to go through the 3 monitoring reports and then ask for public input. And then go on to the report.
We still have no one in the public, so I think we're good.
There you go. So Finance Committee, John.
Okay, so Mark did a great job kind of summarizing what happened. I'll make it even briefer. He already covered the question of the grants. I don't need to say anything else about it. With regards to the $4.4 million rollover, it's exactly as Mark described it. There was a good explanation as to why the spend hadn't occurred. You know, we weren't ready yet, basically, in a couple of circumstances. And I was pleased to see that the Finance Committee had some questions that Larry and I would like to hear asked, because they asked for what we would call a 10K analysis of the numbers. In other words, opening balance, additions, spend, ending balance, rolling it forward instead of just a clump looking at 1 year, which gives you a better sense of how things have occurred. So, you know, that was fine. I wasn't physically there, interfered with a class at Cal, but in December, I will be able to attend virtually in person, as it were, to the December meeting. And that's it.
Cool.
It looks like we have a comment or question from member Chu.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I wasn't able to attend either, but I thought Mark made a really good comment about describing the excess, which I think in his words were designed and purposeful. So, you know, because of the circumstances that he's described, it wasn't by accident or that we didn't spend money that should have been. I think in terms of just giving a brief, you know, overview, is kind of a finance committee thing too. I just want to place it to you in kind of plain English as much as I can. When you go back and look at the financial statements, what you'll see is, you know, if you equate it to for-profit worlds, they talk about retained earnings, and what that means is that, you know, it's money that you hold over from one fiscal period to another. And that's the same thing that, you know, they've done here. I think the way they describe it on the financials is a net surplus or unrestricted funds or something like that. I can't remember, but it shows up on the statement of position, and it's a way to carry over the excess surplus from the previous year so that they can use it for the current year. And that's effectively what this whole discussion was about. So if you were just to take a straight statement of activities or an income statement, and you spent more than you had income for this year, it would show up as a deficit or a net operating loss. And that's not the case, because you're carrying over funds from the excess funds from the prior year. So
bottom line is you understood and it was all good.
oh yeah, it's all good. But, you know, I know that sometimes people look at things and say, oh, you had a loss this year. You really didn't, because you had, you know, unrestricted funds or excess funds or a surplus left over from a prior year.
Thank you for explaining.
And if I can add one thing that I forgot to add in my executive officer's report, but it kind of fits in with the finance committee, is that I do have a meeting with the auditor scheduled for Friday of this week. So we are on track to have a more timely audit for which is important for you guys, so you can write your report about the audit.
And that's for this year that we aren't even starting.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And do we have anybody in the public yet? Nope. Okay. Well, then I won't worry about asking for public input.
Unless some of you have some people in your background like we've had before.
Does my cat get a vote?
Does your cat have an opinion?
We used to have a cat at our council meetings, but she didn't get a vote.
I'm just glad that Larry made it all the way back to his office and he doesn't have a CHP guy standing next to him.
It was one of those commutes. It was stop and go most of the way. So you guys helped listening, took my attention toward other things.
Here's another opportunity for Larry's cat to speak up. For our annual report committees, the first one is the finance. Those of you taking a look at finance, Larry, Chu, do you want to give us an update on where you are with respect to the annual report?
Yeah, I have nothing to report for this month, but you know, as it was mentioned in one of the staff reports for October 11th, you know, the fiscal 21-22 has closed. So Mark, I'll need to get together with you and just get a dump of, you know, the general ledger, and I can format it out to the other two members of the finance committee so we can do our own analysis of that. Hopefully has something we can report back on for our November meeting, at least the preliminary.
Yeah, I'm confident that for the core spending, that ledger's ready to go. So I'll reach out to Lisa and get it to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. John or Kingston, if you have anything else you'd like to report, yeah, please do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. For work plan, Jennifer, you wanna give us where you are in your committee?
Yeah, well, we're progressing, at least in how we're thinking about what we're going to do. And I think we're all pretty enthusiastic about it. We decided to focus our committee on the education outreach and D-space efforts this year. And with an attempt to focus our review on whether the efforts serve the mission of MWPA. And so we're going to gather information and metrics from Fire Safe Marin, Marin Master Gardeners, Ready Marin, and D-Space efforts in Central and West Marin. So, you know, we're looking forward to reviewing all the information that Mark brings us from the member agencies, but we're not going to pursue additional information from those agencies in other areas. So that's where we are. Does anybody have any questions, or any of my committee members want to add to that?
So then, if I understand, instead of covering all the projects, you'll be covering D-space projects.
Well, we want to look at whatever information we can get from Fire Safe Marin, Marin Master Gardeners, and D-Space efforts. So basically under the umbrella of education and outreach of the public, the areas that MWPA is funding in that arena. Lucy, yeah, did you?
Yes, thank you. I guess it's pretty much the same question, is that what would you not be looking at when you're choosing to dig down at public education? What I mean, you're looking obviously at it's the suitability of the project in terms of the language. Are you then not looking at some of the I guess I don't want to fill it in. What are you not looking at?
Well, we're not looking at projects relating to vegetation management, fuel breaks, all the efforts that, the various entities are engaged in that regard. Some of our discussions, we're trying to define what we're doing so that we're not looking at whether the money's well spent. That's not our job. That's that's finance. And we're trying, one of the discussions has been to try to make this committee more aware of these other activities more in real time, rather than trying to look back at it. And so it seemed like the education and outreach was something we could try to gather some metrics on now and try to look at, what MWPA is in funding and involved in that arena. And part of the thinking is that every year we don't need to drill down every year in every area, and that this, we could try to define that. That seemed a good thing to define for this year, and maybe next year it will be one area in one different area, but not try to encompass too much at one time. Something that,
and Lucy, Mark is going to be gathering that basic information where was the project completed, that kind of information, Mark, and we will obviously take a look at the information that is coming in to Mark, or so far is in from most of the agencies. So we will still be looking at that, but not doing quite the deep dive on every single project, because if you remember that last year when we looked at this, we only had local projects to look at. That there was not this whole universe of core projects, that the only core projects last year were the Fire Safe Marin projects. So I think this being able to take a deep dive this year into one particular subject, and then in a future year, it may be taking a deep dive into vegetation management or a deep dive into evacuation planning, or but we still will be looking at the information that Mark has gathered.
Good, thank you.
And I'll just add what we talked quite a bit about is we didn't want to step into finance and get into the overlap finance. And so we had long discussions about how to go forward and keep these clean and separate from each other.
And if I could just add a real quick comment, I love the connection you guys are making with DSpace and public education, because I think our most important aspect of DSpace is public education, and the most important part of our public education is our residents becoming prepared, in part by creating DSpace.
And the DSpace is the one thing where we're not preaching to the choir, because I think so far what Fire Safe Marin is doing and what UCCE, Master Gardeners, it's still a lot of it is who's coming to you for the information, where the DSpace inspectors are going to every home and touching one-on-one and hopefully sharing appropriate information.
And some of the stats I shared with Pat today, 33,000 plus inspections last year, with more than 4,000 hours of one-on-one time with our residents. And so that's why I think the DSpace program is the #1 way to educate the public.
both educating the public regarding fire safety, but it's also educating the public about MWPA.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions, comments about work plan?
Don't see any more hands. I see Kingston deep in thought, but I don't see any more hands.
And what does it look like when Kingston's deep in thought? Okay.
I'm still trying to get the lighting straightened out in this room. And my apologies. Yeah, we had a giant leak. And the whole office had to be replaced with one corner of it. Had it all fixed up and everything ready to put the carpet in, and it another leak. So it's,
Oh, no.
it's another time. It's the second time. Now I'm finally back I'm still straightening things out. So yes, deep in thought is trying to figure out how to make the lighting better. Sorry. Anyway, for our committee report is basically that Mark went through everything. Lucy talked to him about the recommendations from the COC for the annual, our COC annual report recommendations. And I think that explains that. We're still looking at the website. That I still have to talk with your webmaster to see what improvements to expect this year. The only other issue, and Lucy again talked with Mark, was about the COC taking action in support of advisory technical committee, converting to non-Brown Act body by amendment to the formation agreement. And I guess, Mark, you'll have to speak to this yourself, but you basically are saying we should probably defer this until much later. It's a good idea, but it's something that perhaps needs to reach a certain stage before it can reach fruition. So we will continue to look at it. Do you have any comment on that, Mark?
I'll share exactly what I shared with Lucy. And I've had this conversation with other members of the COC, other members of the ops and the board, and it's the frustration of the advisory technical committee, which is staff being a Brown Act committee, and how odd that is, and how much of a burden it can be. And it's a spot where the Brown Act is probably counterintuitive. That we feel the Brown Act hurt our transparency with the advisory technical committee working together. We've only, and the reason why I caution a little bit more patience, not much more patience, but a little bit more patience, is we've only had 1 year with the work plan portal, which is really the one that created the struggle. So we learned, we learned from that. My thought is to let's put in some fixes for a second year, and if we show that we can't fix it, it's also be about 3 years where the MWPA has had the opportunity to earn the trust of the residents. Then we can move forward and say, hey, this is what we found about the Brown Act. Is I worry a little bit about the perception is, oh, you guys created this MWPA, you were talking about all this transparency, and automatically right away you want to take away one of your committees out of the Brown Act. I want to show that we, first of all, we earned the trust of the residents, and that we tried to do our best through that. And we actually have reasons why we recommend taking it out of the Brown Act meetings.
It's got to make a very good case.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions?
No hands raised.
No hands raised, Rebecca. I'm sorry.
Silence is golden.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And still no members of the public?
Nope.
Okay. We will move on then to information items. Anybody step right in and stop me if I'm missing something. Information items. We have an update on the calendar for the annual report work. And is that Pat, are you going to be talking about that one?
Yeah, I can give a very brief update, because we talked about this the last time when we pulled up this calendar, this mythical calendar that we created in the beginning. And it has October 31st in research and start writing. And if the other committees are like the work plan committee, we have definitely not reached the end of research. So I think things are, and obviously finance has just begun its work. So I think things are going to be pushed back a little, but hopefully not a huge amount. On the original work plan, we had the ideal finish of writing November 21st and an absolute finish December 12th. And I'm still hoping that we can meet that December 12th to finish the writing so that everybody can relax and enjoy the holiday. And then right after the holidays, that gets turned over to the report editing committee, which I think is Lucy, Rebecca, Jennifer, and myself. to put it all together and get it in its final form by mid-February, to be able to then turn our attention a little bit to the creation of the work plans for the next year. So just want to remind everybody that we have an aspirational calendar, which has already slipped a little bit, but and if anybody has any questions or comments about that, raise your hand. Lucy.
Excuse me. So I was wondering whether, in fact, what you would be doing is more of it's the research period that would be completed by December, so that the actual so you would be ready to hand the research over to what would then be not just the editing committee, but the writing committee that would take the research and compile it.
Well, I think as we did last year, each one of those subcommittees did some preliminary writing. And then the editing committee took what was the preliminary writing from each of the committees and turned it into the final report. I can't imagine, I mean, I guess maybe, as you say, it's the research in written form. Research in a form ready to be handed over to the editing committee.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Any other hands raised?
Oh, Larry.
This is just on a separate topic. I don't know, maybe Mark can also come in on it, or anyone else if they've heard about it. One of the things that I have to do for my work is, we're always looking for tools that can help us with better situational awareness of what's going on, just in the environment in general. And, last week, I didn't get any notifications from the county or anything, but I did get a notification on an app called Watch Duty. And that's a thing that's run by nonprofits where they're just monitoring, whatever's going on out there, and they'll post, whatever they hear about in terms of fire. So I thought that was pretty handy. It wasn't anything big, but apparently they had picked it up on the airwaves and then pushed it out, got an audible alarm, and got a short write-up on it. So, I always think, anything that can help the public with, again, getting better situational awareness, might get them mobilizing sooner.
I've been using Watch Duty for quite a long time, and I think it's really good. Do you also get Pulse Point? Because sometimes Pulse Point comes through first, and then I go to Watch Duty to figure out what's going on.
No, but thanks for suggesting it. I'll try that out.
Yeah, I use Pulse Point. Yeah.
I got that one from Mark just to.
Pulse Point will absolutely positively come first because it's connected straight to the CAD.
Yeah.
And Watch Duty has a lot of pros. It also has some cons, and that is the information that Watch Duty pushes out is not verified by public officials. And so, and while there's a lot of good about Watch Duty, the bad about Watch Duty is that the commander may say, I want evacuations here, but that may not be the final decision. And then Watch Duty pushes out what they heard on the radio, but was not the final decision. Then the public officials push out the real evacuation information. And it's different than what the public saw on Watch Duty. This has happened. And so whenever there's conflicting information, it's difficult. And that's where we in the fire service need to be very, very prompt with our notifications, so the residents are assured that they'll get accurate information from a reliable source in a timely fashion and not rely on Watch Duty for their evacuation notifications. That's what the lesson is.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else about any of that?
I don't see any more hands up.
Okay. to discussion items. Day and time of the Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. Initially, when we set the time, day and time as whatever it is, third Wednesday,
Fourth,
fourth Wednesday at 5:30. The 5:30 time was predominantly for one person who was still working, who's no longer on the committee. Day of the week was, I think, because of all the other meetings, that seemed to be one that a day that's untouched. But I'll put it out there that if you all want to think about, are we happy with the day and time, and then fine, we'll leave it. Because another point, when we may need to think about it again, is in January, when we have 4 new members on or potentially 4 new members on the committee. But if you would like it to be a different day and time, speak up, and we can think about that.
Next month, if we do it on the fourth
Yeah,
Wednesday, it's the day before Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, yeah.
and we made an adjustment last year by moving it up
Yeah.
a week earlier. I think staff's recommendation this year would be to move it a week back if you want to stick to Wednesdays.
Yeah, I would move it back the week before.
How does that relate to the board meeting? That would be before the board meeting.
It would put it the day before the board meeting.
Well, this
If you
actually,
move forward,
the board meeting would be moved forward also? No.
no.
But this does bring up just a technical question that I have, which is when the board acknowledges our minutes, we actually haven't approved our minutes. So there might theoretically be a situation where somebody says, no, this is completely wrong, and 5 pages of these minutes.
Oh, Jesus.
Just
Don't do this.
an interesting
No.
I mean, how does that work in terms of procedure?
And that's why we say that they're acknowledging the draft minutes.
Draft, okay, yeah. That explains it. Thank you.
And Larry has his hand up.
Yeah, I guess one of the other possibilities is if you don't anticipate the board doing any business in December, we can kind of move it out a week or 2 and split the difference and then go through the holidays and then meet again in January.
That's not a bad idea, actually.
Does that violate anything about?
We could do the 30th. That's a Wednesday.
Yeah, or that first week of December, but there's no violation of canceling a regular meeting. We would just issue, Mark and his staff, we just issue a statement saying that regular meeting is canceled and we call a special meeting for this other date.
Okay.
Are you thinking like the 7th, Larry? That would be the 7th?
Yeah, if we kind of split the difference, but I don't, 30th, 7th, whatever, but if there's really not much going on with the board or any other of the committees in December, that 4th December fourth week would end up being between Christmas and New Year's.
Right.
We also have John's hand up.
Yeah.
All I was going to say was that I think we're probably going to have a different tenure of the conversation once we go back to live meetings, right? Particularly if we're all over the county and, we all know how Highway 101 is at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I just raised that as something to consider in the world when we get back to seeing each other in person.
So
It also has, thank you, John. And Rebecca Pat has her hand up.
When in talking and thinking about splitting the difference and only having one meeting between December and or November and December, my only concern is we will be in the heart of report writing, and just wonder if we might have reason to need to meet. I don't know. I can't remember quite how things worked out the last time. Also, if I would have a personal preference for moving this meeting up to 5 o'clock instead of 5:30, if that works for everybody who's on it now. I know that there are those of you who still work, but it might be easier for Mark and Martina too, if it were more within normal business hours.
Well, I know that Max was one of the driving forces for evening meetings, but this is a conversation that goes on about a lot of public meetings. Larry and John can back me up, is that the inaccessibility for those who work to attend meetings. I say this as we have no attendees in our audience. But that was also one of the considerations, that this is the Citizens Oversight Committee
Right.
that is part of the citizens, and that there could be kind of a lead by example of, we want the meetings to be more accessible for everybody, including those who work.
I agree with that.
So that would shift us more to a later hour. Would that be the suggestion, more 6:30 or 7 to start? And that would allow someone like John, if we're going to have live meetings, to drive 101 and maybe not hit all that late afternoon traffic.
I don't care when I'll be honest with
Yeah.
you. I'm open
I
for
don't wanna have-
wherever you guys want to meet. We'll support it.
And we should have a subcommittee to figure this out.
We are the subcommittee. We can do it here.
I know that. I know that. That's the problem.
Question we do need to answer. Let's table the whole big discussion. And either send it to subcommittee or study it in January. But we do need to decide about November's meeting.
Well, how about if I make a motion that we move it to either the first or second Wednesday of December, depending on how people feel. Let's have a talk about that. And then the motion can be amended, or we can vote on what we decide.
Okay,
And Larry Chu has his hand up.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is, Pat, to your point about needing to meet because of the business we're doing and getting our reports and things. If our goal for this year is really to target the end of February, then maybe the individual work groups can meet on their own at a time that's mutually
Right.
agreeable to them. And then us as a larger group will probably just take reports at whatever we decide, from the last question that was just asked.
Yeah, I agree with Larry. I mean, it seems to me like if we're not doing this, we're actually doing the work. That seems to be a good idea. And if I would second Larry's suggestion to either do it the first or second week of December. I'm ambivalent. Either one's fine.
Yeah, same here.
And Jennifer has her hand up.
I like the 7th. It's before the deadline we've put into place for ourselves, and it avoids the holidays, and I think it's a good day.
And I'm giving blood on the 14th at 6 p.m. So that would be kind of difficult.
It's remote, Larry. You can ring your phone.
It's true. It's true. So I'll make the motion to have our next meeting on the 7th and not have a November meeting, not have a November meeting, and move our December meeting to the 7th.
I second.
All right, so it's time to vote. Martina, you're on.
Gladly, sir. Member Chu,
Aye.
Member Cole,
Aye.
Member Dilworth,
Aye.
Member Howard,
Aye.
Member Macaulay,
Aye.
Member Minnicus,
Aye.
Member Randolph,
Aye.
and Chair Suggs.
aye.
Passed with unanimous vote.
We'll make the arrangements to make it work.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Committee members. Any requests regarding future agenda items? Nada?
Nope.
Okay,
That's it.
then I will call the meeting adjourned at 6:36.
Okay, great.